things going, Nate? Good. Are you still at? You're still at UB, right?
I'll just go ahead and get started. Hi, I'm Steph Orme. Thank you so much for coming, first of all. I appreciate it. So the title of my talk today is All Work and No Play, How Gendered Leisure Norms Drive Access to and Enjoyment of Video Games. So I work as an academic. Right now I'm teaching at Emerson College, and I specialize in teaching and researching about the digital games industry and also gaming culture. So my topic today is actually, this was my doctoral dissertation, which I completed last spring, right around this time. It might have even been like to the day, so that's pretty cool. So yeah, I'm happy to be able to kind of share that with you all today. Aside from academic sort of implications, I also think there's some nice tie-ins to industry and things that I would hope developers would also take into consideration in your own field. So kind of best of a lot of worlds. So a little bit of background, kind of where I started with this project and why I thought it was an important issue worth tackling. For me, like all great research, I think projects come from a place of rage or frustration with the status quo and how things are currently going down. So I read a lot of research as part of my job, and a lot of you are probably familiar with reports like this one from the ESA. So for those of you who don't know, right, the ESA is this organization. They put out these reports every year. This was the 2017 data because that's when I was working on this particular project, but there is 2018 data out there currently. And so every year they put out these reports that are kind of like a landscape of who's playing video games, right? So who's playing these things in terms of gender, age, this is all in the United States, that kind of context, right? Motivations, what are people playing, why, that sort of thing. So it's really useful data. So the thing I want to focus on with this, or that really drew my interest, is the general trend we've seen for the last decade has been steadily increasing female participation among people who reportedly play video games in the United States. And so this number in 2017, it was around 44%. I think the year before it was 48%. So this number kind of fluctuates up and down, but it's generally, the trend has been this increase, right, from what we've seen a decade prior. So that's awesome, right? So on one hand, more and more women than ever are playing video games, which is great. However, what really has drawn my interest in recent years is despite this growing overall female participation, what we're still seeing is a persistent gender-based gap in participation when it comes to children, right? Identified in the research as anyone under the age of 18. So in other words, young boys are still playing games more often and for longer periods of time than young girls. And this has been documented since really the 1990s, right, when people started to actually track this kinds of stuff. So there's other research that supports this, and 20 years later, we're still kind of seeing the same trend, right? But then adult women have become an increasingly large portion of the gaming population, right? So today, adult women actually outpace young boys in terms of games play and consumption from the consumer end. And so to me, as a feminist researcher, because that's also a lot of the work I do, I say, what's up with that, right? There's no biological imperative why young boys should be more into gaming than young girls. So clearly what we have is patterns of socialization, right, and upbringing. And so that kind of became the impetus for this project, right? Kind of getting down to the socio-cultural factors that shape young girls' engagement or lack of engagement with video game culture, right? And this is important for a lot of reasons because, as you may know anecdotally, or for some of you have experienced this, or you've read about in research, there has been studies to suggest that having access to games in your youth actually makes you more likely to pursue STEM-related careers in college, right? or majors and then on to those kinds of colleges. So as we continue to try to boost diversity in the ranks within the industry, things like early access to gaming can actually become really, really important, right? Aside from the fact that just from a gender standpoint, it didn't make sense, right? And so as an academic, I'm just curious and want to poke holes in this, right? So anyway, what we've kind of gotten over the years is this lack of interest narrative, as I like to call it, right? So you hear people say, young girls just don't like games, right? And again, I say, I don't buy that, right? And some of that is, I grew up as a young girl playing games literally since I was about 4 years old, right? And I know others who have as well. So again, this was about kind of painting the broader picture, right? Trying to understand what's causing this gender gap among children specifically, right? So another one of my frustrations with this, not just because it has implications on the industry, but that researchers have also kind of fueled this narrative. So anyone who's vaguely familiar with academic research in this area, you'll see scores and scores of studies that send out surveys, experiments, trying to pinpoint what types of games in terms of genre, multiplayer versus solo player, basically on a gender basis, right? And this narrative has emerged over the last few years that boys and men like competitive games, or they like violent games, and they like multiplayer games. And then girls like cooperative games and team games, right? And don't like these other things. And this, again, it gets upheld in research, right? Time and time again, we see this narrative. And then there are people who will try to refute that, right? And it gets into interesting kind of political contestation. And I know this chart, you can see it a lot clearer up there than on my screen. But this is a lot of what we see, right? So things like match 3 games. So that's kind of I think, like Candy Crush, right? The idea of swapping around things and you line them up. There's puzzle games, casual games. And a lot of people will say well, that's, women are mostly playing puzzle games, so they don't count as quote unquote real gamers, right? That's a whole basket of things that we can talk about. So anyways, people take this data, right, first of all as truth, and then use that to make decisions about gaming culture and the industry that are problematic in a lot of ways, right? And so I'm tired of it, right? It really frustrates me to no end. So basically with my project, I'm trying to paint, what is it that women are experiencing with games culture? How do they understand it? When are they accessing it, right? How are they becoming exposed to games? And so what I did for this project is I said, listen, when a lot of times when we study in the academic sphere, when we study things like video game play, we kind of look at it in isolation, right? We ask people about the games they play, but we don't really think about how it might relate to other kinds of media, television, film, reading, right? Music, other things that might have influences on the kind of games that we consume and the way that we interact with them. But the even bigger thing that's just been untouched since game studies has kind of existed for 20, 30 years, give or take, is the idea that our free time itself is highly influenced by our gender identities, right? So for this project, what I actually did was tapped into a whole body of literature that I didn't know existed called leisure studies, which is the professional study of people's use of free time. It's really cool. So when I was at Penn State at the time when I was doing this, I reached out to someone in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism and found a woman, Camilla Hodge, who does amazing work on gender and technology in people's free time. And she was a huge key influencer in this project. So I said, I think before we talk about games kind of in isolation or in a vacuum like we tend to study things because of research, we need to think about kind of the bigger picture. Right? And maybe that will give us some insights into these charts and graphs about motivations, about why girls and women might play so many phone games, right? And is there more to the story that we can kind of tease out? So, research questions, right? Those were just kind of the things that I was trying to answer with this study that I did over about a year's time. So, just walking through kind of what I was interested, I asked women, why do you play digital games, right? And digital games here meaning computer games, mobile games, console games, right? However, basically anything that wasn't tabletop card games, right? So why do you play? What does video game play mean to you, right? So I have a background in communication studies, so the idea of meaning making, right? And how we derive meaningful experiences from things like play and from things like video games, those are culturally significant, right? And so to me, I wanted to understand what was kind of going through my participants' heads when they talk about play, when they talk about what gaming means to them, right? I'll talk more about that a little later. What trends in video game play were the adult women in my study experiencing? So this was things like, what devices do you play on? What types of genres do you play? So trying to replicate or at least see if my findings matched up with some of those charts and graphs and other studies that had come out before them. Based on that, here's where the leisure studies stuff comes in. I wanted to talk about leisure time, right? What does my participants' leisure time look like? How much free time did you have, right? How do you use it? How much of that time is spent on video games compared to, cleaning, right? Or even other types of media. Again, in the past, we haven't really looked at things within kind of their broader context. So that was really a core thing that I was trying to surround this project with. And how do you negotiate it, right? So the thing with leisure constraints is just because we're busy, or may not, have a lot of time or have a lot of freedom to do an activity doesn't necessarily mean we just don't do it, right? A constraint means, it makes it harder for you. In some cases, it might shut you out completely, but generally we try to still find ways to make things work, right? So I'll try to go to the gym, right? If that's leisure for me, it's not for me personally. It's terrible. But if you like that sort of thing, right? You make time in your busy schedule to go, right? So you're navigating that constraint of time. So how are people doing that, women in particular, with gaming in their lives? And then how do they explain how their relationship with gaming has evolved over the course of their life? So this one was really key. As I'll talk about in a minute, I talked to women between the ages of 18 and 70 years old, which is awesome. And for a lot of reasons, I was interested in what that evolution with gaming looked like, in part because some of my participants predated video games, which I'll get to, right? But also because this gets at that gender gap among youth question, right? So for my participants who grew up with gaming versus those who didn't, right? Where maybe they lived, like me in the 90s, who didn't have access to consoles as girls, and then would discover them as teens or as adults, right? Like, what was that moment? What was that cultural turn for them that introduced them to gaming, right? So socialization, I knew, would be a big part of this puzzle. So what I did, so it was a two-part study. Like I said, this was my dissertation. So this was like a big, involved project, and definitely a labor of love for me in a lot of ways. So first I did a survey. And I did a cross-sectional survey, just big, measuring a lot of different things, like I talked about earlier, what you play, what devices, why you play, how do you feel about the gamer identity, which was its own fascinating kind of area, and questions about leisure time in general. Again, like how do you divide your leisure time up among different activities? What does that look like? There were both kind of closed items, so things like on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about X, Y, and Z? But also some open-ended questions where people could actually type out responses, and then I would analyze those separately. I ended up initially receiving over 5,000 responses to my survey, which I don't know if I have any academics in the room, but that's insane, right? To put it this way, when I proposed this study to my dissertation committee at the time, they were like, so how many people do you think you'll get? And I said, I'm gonna go for 250 to 400 people, right? And they were like, sounds awesome, great, that'd be amazing. If you can get 400, that's like, you're good, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of times because we can't always compensate people for taking surveys, right? So people gotta be willing to do it, right? That kind of stuff. Essentially what happened is I had posted this on some social media channels and it spread like wildfire. In 48 hours, I'd already eclipsed that 3,000 people. And I did this actually around PAX East in 2017. Yeah, 2017 PAX East. No, 2016. Sorry, 2016 PAX East. Right around that time frame. So pretty much the week that PAX was going on is when this was going down. So I did some data cleaning, and if people have questions about that, we can talk about that later. But essentially I wound up with a final sample of just over 3,000 individuals. So they ranged from 18 years old, so they had to be adults in order to participate, and I had folks as old as 70 years old, so quite a few in their 50s and 60s, and great stuff that I'll talk about with them. From there, I did in-depth, semi-structured interviews, so just interviews, like 2.5 hour long interviews, most of them Skype, because I was fortunate enough to have participants from all over the place. Mostly North America, but I had people in Europe, I had one participant from Tokyo, quite a few in South America, so it was cool. Again, like the power of the internet. This wildly exceeded my expectations for a school project, I'll tell you that. And so I chose 21 participants, and basically the idea of the interviews was just to dig deeper into some of those topics that had been briefly raised in the survey, right, to kind of expand on those. And essentially what I did is I sampled people from kind of different age groups, and based on responses in the survey. This was a piece of one of my recruitment materials that went out. I'm a huge Overwatch fan, was a longtime Diva main, and so what I did is I solicited female identifying individuals over 18 years or older who play video games. And I'm really cautious of any time I'm recruiting for studies, I avoid using the word gamer. And this is because, and this is actually something that came up in the data, women and folks of color and queer folks as well have really contentious relationships with that kinds of terms for a lot of reasons, especially in a post-Gamergate era. And what I didn't want is people who maybe play mobile phone games to say like, well, I don't know if I count, right? Or I would even find people in my study who played 20 hours a week on console who still wouldn't call themselves a gamer, right? Which is a whole area that I won't touch on a lot in here today, but it's also part of this project as well. So basically, I didn't want people to think, to read too much into that label because it holds so much cultural weight in gaming culture, right? So again, I'm happy to answer questions about that kind of stuff later, but so you'll always see me refer to them as players rather than gamers unless they adopt that label for themselves. So this table is a breakdown of some age-related factors that I found. So the average age of my participants was 30 years old, which is nice because if you look at a lot of the ESA and other kind of industry reports, they peg the current average US gamer somewhere around 33, 35, I think is the current number. So this is a pretty nice reflection of that. The average age my participants started playing was 9 years old. Most of them had been playing for about 21 years. So as I mentioned with this project, it got interesting because that's the overall sample figures. But I did have some individuals, my older ones, who growing up with games literally wasn't an option, right? The technology did not exist. So I wanted, to at least represent that, to say, yeah, I'm aware of that. So I separated my pool out into individuals over 45 and under, 45 and over, I should say, and under 45, which is around the time when the first home consoles became widely available. So questions of access got a little bit easier, right? And so I'll talk about, why access becomes really, really important. So I do, post those numbers here so you can kind of get a sense, right? But 8.5 for people who, were of the age where they could have been exposed to gaming in their childhood. So some findings. Unsurprisingly, I found out that socialization is huge, right? And by socialization, I mean your social networks, your friends, your family, the people around you, being key determinants of your access to games and gaming culture in your youth, right? And if you think about it, if I'm a child, I'm dependent on my parents for purchasing power, right? I don't have my own money. I might get an allowance or something, right? They still have to take me to the store. I can't buy certain things if I'm under a certain age, right? And so this makes sense, right? But in terms of how gender plays into this, I found a lot of interesting things. So perhaps unsurprisingly, given the time period that a lot of my participants were growing up, again, the average age of them being 30, male family members were really instrumental, right? So I had overwhelmingly in my survey of 3,004 women, dads being really instrumental in this process, right? So I include here, the age of my participants as well as kind of the regions of the globe where they're from. But a lot of them would talk about, either older brothers that they had, or sometimes even younger brothers, and they were kind of their gateway into that. Or again, like I said, a lot of them, dads were gamers, and they talked about, gaming with dad, actually. Right? So, it made a lot of sense. It kind of became like a family bonding kind of thing for some of them. There was this really funny trend or theme that emerged that I jokingly called Dad's Doom and Diablo. And it was that I had I think about 40 individuals who told a nearly identical story about being really young, like sometimes 4 or 5 years old, sitting in Dad's lap and helping him play either Doom or Diablo, repeatedly came up. And I know those were the games of that time, right? So it made sense. And they were PC games, which I also think is worth knowing, right? So again, if you look at literature out of the 1990s, for young girls, most of their access with games came through PCs. Right? So consoles weren't traditionally as common. As my participants talk about, their brothers had consoles. A lot of their access was through the PC because it was the family computer. They had it for school, for work, right? A multi-purpose device in the living room so it could be monitored, right? All these kinds of gender-related kind of things, right? So I thought it was interesting, yeah. So sitting on there playing Doom with Dad. I was probably 3 when we started playing Diablo together. It's interesting to me because it's not exactly the fuzzy game that many people would probably want their children playing, but this was really an emotional bonding thing that a lot of my 40 of them talked about. So I just thought that was quirky, and I'm still figuring out what other layers of that are worth unpacking, but it's it came up too much to not mention. So one of my favorite findings, just in terms of, I find it really interesting, is this idea of the console location. So for my participants who grew up with games in their lives, overwhelmingly they talked about the consoles being located in their brother's bedrooms, right? This one participant from Ireland up top even talks about, so she perceived it as a passive-aggressive move on the part of her parents, right? So it was, we're gonna have a console, but it's really your brother's console, right? And they didn't say that she couldn't play it, but if she wanted to, she had to go into his room, which meant she had to have his permission, and sometimes he would say, like, no, you just can't, right? What do you do? And so she really perceived that as kind of unfair, right? And a few of my participants told similar kinds of stories, expressed similar types of sentiments. Or the idea of sneaking into their brother's room, right? They had to sneak into it. And I love that because, again, the word sneaking was one that got used a lot of times. And it has this kind of metaphorical sense to it, right? So there's like sneaking into the forbidden territory of the siblings' room, but also sneaking into the forbidden territory of gaming, right? For some of them, like their parents really did not want them doing this. And so there was like this cool transgressive behavior of the space, but also, the form of leisure itself, right? And so again, that was a story that I heard a lot. My participants were asked, do you have siblings, and what are their gender identities? Are they older, younger, that sort of thing? What I found is that if they reported having male siblings at all, didn't matter if they were older or younger, they were more likely to have had access to a console growing up than if they only had sisters or were an older couple. So again, this suggests that a lot of these console purchasing decisions were structured around the male siblings in the family, right? And again, going back to the 90s, I think games, that's when we start to see them being marketed a little bit more towards a male demographic, right? I always find that interesting. Like when games first came out, it was like a family entertainment system, right? And then we kind of moved into more niche types of marketing. And I think that's when we start to see this kind of gender shift. I also asked, if you had access to a console, did you feel like, your parents encouraged it as an appropriate leisure for your brothers more than you, or was it treated equally? And they did say that if they had brothers, they felt like, even if they weren't banned from playing, it was still seen as more appropriate for their male siblings, right? And so I found that to be a pretty powerful statement from them. I asked, were your parents players ever at any point in their life? Because I think that's key, right? I don't know if people in here are parents, I am not, but I can very much understand the idea that if I have grown up playing with technology or engaging in an activity, and I trust it and know it's safe, I'm going to be more likely to let my kids engage in it, right? Whereas, if I'm skeptical of gaming as a whole, I know nothing about it, I'm going to be less likely to take that dive, right? And that's what the ESRB was created for, right? So I did find out that participants who had gamer parents or parents who had even gone to arcades, they were more likely to have had a console in their homes than those who did not. And in general, those parents also had more positive attitudes towards gaming. So they encouraged play, not even just like I allowed it, right? But it was actually like acceptable and encouraged and maybe even something they did together, right? So what I think is cool about that is that as today's generation of more diverse players go on and maybe have kids or become uncles or aunts or whatever, we see more and more of that kind of encouragement, right, for future generations, which would be awesome. So recapping this section, right, how my younger participants were socialized, what I found is that gender really matters, right? So again, the presence of male siblings, regardless of age, meant that my participants had more access to gaming, even if that was still with some restrictions, right? So even though the console was in the boys' bedrooms, they still had access to a degree that my male sibling-less individuals reportedly did not. Gamer parents seem to matter, right? So again, if they were gamers, they had more favorable attitudes, were more likely to see that as appropriate leisure for their children, which makes sense. And then the other cool part, I haven't really talked about my older participants with this yet, but they obviously had different stories to tell. So they didn't necessarily have family members to introduce it to them because they were kind of on the cutting edge at the time, right, when they were growing up. So what I found is a lot more discussion about arcades, right, which like really made me envious because those have died out in a lot of places in the United States, so it's kind of sad. Student lounges, a lot of them were at university at the time. A couple of them I remember saying like their dad was an engineering professor or things like that. So that was important to look at too. A lot of them grew up in families of mechanics or families of engineers. So there was always kind of a culture of technology ingrained into their upbringing, right? And that seems to really matter. I heard that kind of trend a lot. But in general, with my older participants, it was a lot more about self-motivated seeking out, right? If you wanted to get into gaming, you heard about it somewhere, or you saw an ad somewhere, and you had to go out and do the research, or you had to go out and find access to it, as opposed to being, maybe kind of indoctrinated into it, if you will, by your family, right, for better or worse. So I thought, that was interesting. So it's to say that maybe today that family socialization matters a lot more than it used to, maybe, but it's also easier to find stuff on the internet, right? Like that's a luxury that we have today. So it's kind of a toss-up, right? But definitely has changed over time. So as I mentioned, a huge part of this project was centered around the idea of leisure, right? And I wanted to understand how people's gaming in their free time fits into larger patterns of free time, because that helps us understand questions of access and how we're spending our time and why we make the gaming choices that we do, right? So I asked them, how much time a week do you spend gaming in an average week, knowing that sometimes more weeks are crazy than others, right? On average, participants reportedly spent 13.8 hours a week on gaming, yeah. And I asked them too, so how much of your gaming time, or how much of your total leisure time is consumed by gaming, right? Because maybe I have a ton of leisure time, and so maybe a little under 15 hours or 14 hours isn't that much, right? And they had a sliding bar in the survey, so I actually asked them to slide it to kind of give me a percentage range. So what I found is that on average, it was about a little under half of their total leisure time. And what I think is significant about that is it's saying these aren't just people who once in a blue moon sit down and play a party game or something, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that. But these are individuals who, for them, gaming clearly is important, right? In some way. It clearly means something and is a big part of their leisure, right? So should be taken seriously. What I did find was a small relationship between age and time spent playing games. So essentially, the older my participants were, the less likely, or the less time they spent playing on games overall. I don't exactly have an explanation for that yet, because a lot of my older folks that I talked to are retired or live alone. Some of them, talked about playing games for socialization, so it was a big part of their lives. But the general trend was just kind of less time. So something to kind of look into maybe more there. I asked them, are you satisfied with the time you have for gaming? Do you wish you had more time available? And it was uniformly yes, right? They, again, on the survey item, how satisfied are you? Extremely satisfied, right? Satisfied, that kind of thing. And they were generally dissatisfied, specifically with the time they had for gaming, right? They wish they had more of it. So we get the sense that there are things that are keeping them or preventing them from engaging in a pastime, gaming, that they wish they had more access to, right? So of course, I said, what are those things? What do you perceive as the biggest constraints, or you might say barriers, but actually in leisure studies they like to differentiate. Barriers kind of implies you cannot do it, whereas constraints say you can, it's just harder, right? Which I think is a more realistic representation of how we operate in life. So these were what they reported, right? And so on my survey, I had examples for some of these. So for example, care work is taking care of the children or perhaps elderly family member, right? You're providing care for somebody. Whereas family obligations was things like weekly family dinners or any other kind of miscellaneous family things that may not fall directly into that care work category. So they were given examples for all of these. So they were asked, which of these do you feel apply, right? So looking at this, I just want to highlight here 3 in particular. So these were 3, so of the 4 most cited reasons for constraints on gaming, 3 of those 4 are supported well by research to be gendered constraints on leisure, right? So chores, right, or domestic unpaid labor, the stuff I'm doing around the house, care work, caretaking, and this family obligations category, right? Maybe personally or anecdotally, but even if not, there is decades of research backing this up that women, at least in heterosexual relationships, because that's where most of the data we have exists to this point, overwhelmingly shows, right, women feeling like they have less leisure time, and these things being a big factor in that, right? So it was not surprising that that was echoed by my participants as things that they perceived as being big constraints. And yeah, work, of course, right? Everybody wishes we could work less and play more games, absolutely, right? So that, again, is, I think, important, right? So what does this mean, right? Like, what's the connection between leisure and these, the gaming aspects, the devices, the genres that we might play? Well, here's where I think it really starts to get interesting. So it's worth noting that, again, this has been well documented by research for, since the 80s, the idea that women experience leisure in more fragmented chunks. So what I mean by that is that, on average, men might have more uninterrupted periods of leisure, 5 or 6 hours set aside. I think a classic example is like football Sundays, right? It's like you blocked it off, right? It's like your day kind of thing, if you're into that. Not everybody is, I know. And some women are too. But historically speaking, again, in these heterosexual relationships, women will find themselves breaking up their time more and kind of multitasking and doing things in between, right? So it's like, hey, I'm gonna start this load of laundry, and while that's happening, go do something else, maybe read a book, right? For a lot of reasons, right? This work tends to be more broken up and fragmented. So because of that, I'm theorizing that things like mobile gaming or casual games that don't require me to sit down for potentially uninterrupted periods of time as long as 2 or 3 hours, right? If I'm playing a multiplayer game that can't be paused, or I'm raiding with my guild or my fire team that I can't walk away from, it's harder suddenly, right? So all of a sudden the casual, pick it up, play for 10, 15 minutes here and there kind of thing while my laundry's happening or the dishwasher's running becomes a lot more tenable, right, to kind of my lifestyle. So there's one kind of working idea. Childcare, right, can be a constraint. But a cool thing was also that a lot of my participants I asked, do you have children, do you game with them, that kind of thing, actually see gaming as doubling as family leisure time, right? So it was like bonding time together, which is cool, but being the feminist scholar I am, I also like to complicate that, right? So again, there's a lot of research that says that a lot of women's free time does this doubling up, right? You're still performing care work because I'm doing things like planning activities for the family. Like, that's still work, right? Even if it is fun, even if you're gonna get some enjoyment out of it. And so there's still arguably that kind of domestic unpaid labor nature even to this kind of fun leisure. And finally, leisure entitlement. So again, lots of research has been done to demonstrate that women tend to feel less entitled to leisure time, to free time, more guilt about shirking chores or shirking responsibilities, right, for the sake of leisure, right? Which then can obviously have effects on things like gaming. So I'll talk about how this kind of ties into the idea of genre, which is a tricky thing in its own, as well as devices, right? So again, I had asked in my survey, and then also for them to talk about it in interviews, what types of games are you playing and what kinds of devices are you playing on, right? And so this is a breakdown of those. And so you can see action-adventure being the most popular genre. Western RPGs were things like The Witcher or Fallout. That's how those often get defined. Puzzle games right up there, Sims, JRPGs, right? Down at the bottom, things like MOBAs, racing games, and sports. This holds up pretty well with a lot of other studies that have done the same thing, right? So again, we see this trend that women like games with story or world exploration and customization and those kinds of things, and that we just really hate racing and sports games, right? Those are always in every study I've ever seen, like the bottom two, right? And that's a whole other thing I could speculate on, but I'm more interested in talking about some of the other genre stuff in just a sec. But then also with devices, so PC being the most popular, 81% of them playing on PC, closely followed by the mobile phone, right, at 73%, and then kind of working our way down from there. So some things about this that I find interesting. So I found a big difference in terms of age. So the older my participants were, the less likely they were to play most of these things, right? The less likely they were to play action-adventure, JRPGs, first-person shooters, MOBAs, Western RPGs, Sims, racing, fighting, and interactive fiction, right? But the more likely they were to play puzzles and MMOs, right? You might think, like, how are those two kind of things related, right? So puzzles, I think, make sense. A lot of them talked about, I said, like, why do you like puzzle games? And a lot of it was convenience, right? Don't necessarily buy yourself a gaming console, which is fair. But keeping the brain sharp, things like that, especially with age, right? Liking to challenge themselves, and they're relaxing. They're not into the high-stress environments of a first-person shooter. Some of them were, though, which is pretty awesome. And MMOs, which I suspect is due to multi-user dungeons and the popularities in the 80s, right? So a lot of my participants have been gaming since the 80s, those who were older, and they've been playing these multi-user dungeons, which were really, on the cusp of gaming, right? And so from there, they naturally made the shift to things like World of Warcraft. One of my favorite participants, she's like a department chair at a university in Canada. She's 56 years old and is a die-hard World of Warcraft player. She was throwing out terminology about theory crafting, and I had no idea what she was talking about, but I had to go Google later, and I love that, right? Because she was so against the stereotype and the images that we see, marketed to us and in data all the time, and so I loved her. She was amazing. So definitely, there were abnormalities to this, right? But in general, yeah, the older you were, the more likely puzzles and MMOs kind of became what you played. A big part of why things like MMOs and strategy and shooting games ranked much lower is things like a learning curve and fears about skill level. And I heard this from a lot of participants. So some people talked about, so one thing I did is it was what do you play and why? And then when, if they said I really hate racing games or something, I'd say, so why? Why don't you like these games? What is it about puzzles that are awesome? And what do you just hate about sports games? Because I think that's really important, right? And a lot of people would talk about competitive and really competitive games that have an ever-evolving meta, right? So the rules change or, tweaks to characters. So the character that's good 1 week is terrible 2 weeks later, right? And even as someone who plays MOBAs on the regular, it is hard to keep up, right? If that's not if you don't play MOBAs 10 hours a day, right? I couldn't tell you the meta in most that I play. I just kind of play what I want, right? But I heard very real fears and anxieties about this from my participants. They said, I want to play League of Legends, but I don't know where to start, right? And so it started with that, right? Feeling like they couldn't keep up, like they wouldn't be good at it. 2, I'm forced to play with other people, and that terrifies me. Because if I'm bad, they're just gonna rake me over the coals. And I don't want that experience, right? So, another thing is women don't like multiplayer games. It's is it that we don't, naturally don't like them because we hate social interaction? Or is it about the nature of those social interactions, right? And that's not to say that men don't also experience toxic behavior, related to performance in games, because they absolutely do, especially since they're the majority of individuals playing those games. But I think anyone who's, knows someone or has experienced this themselves, it's a different kind of context, right? And I think there's also, if you talked about the pressure of feeling if you're the token woman player on your team, you somehow become a stand-in for all women players, right? So I mess up and it's well, this is why women shouldn't play FPS, right? Yeah. So there was a lot of very real anxiety, right? So I say this because it's not that my participants don't want to play MOBAs or don't want to play FPS games. It's that they're afraid. They're generally afraid, right, to go into those spaces. And it frustrates me, right? So it's sad and really horrible. But I think that's part of what's, contributing to those numbers. In terms of device, a big part of it is convenience, which is a no-brainer, and that's not a gender-specific thing, because I think, that's attractive to anybody. But I did find cases where there is suggestions that some of it can be definitely beneficial to women in particular, because some of these gender-based constraints. So I had a really great story that came out about a woman who was breastfeeding at the time. So she had a young child, and when she was breastfeeding, she couldn't play a console game. It wasn't feasible. So she'd go in a room, and it's you're not gonna move with this kid if the kid's asleep. So she'd take out her phone, she couldn't do anything else, and would play, I forgot what game it was. She downloaded some kind of puzzle game, like Bejeweled or something like that, but not Bejeweled. And she was telling me that as soon as she was done breastfeeding, she put down that game and hasn't touched it since. She doesn't normally play mobile phone games, she's a console player. And so things like that I think were interesting. Suddenly this kind of gender-specific thing finds itself neatly fitting in, the phone fits nicely into the lifestyle of these individuals, right? So again, maybe trying to paint a more accurate depiction of why we might make those choices. Not saying that's the sole reason, right? There's nothing wrong with liking puzzle games at all. But again, things to think about that shape those. And a big one, this one's not even gender-specific, but really about age. And also disability, right, or varying degrees of ability. This was kind of cool. I didn't expect to hear a lot about this in my study, and it's become a whole other now passion project of mine. But a lot of my participants, especially those in their 50s, but really like their 60s, talked about able-bodiedness and controllers. Now we have like the adaptive controller, which I love and I'm promoting constantly. But your average, your PS4 controller is not really conducive to individuals who don't have full utility over hands and fingers and that sort of thing. Whereas a tablet or a mobile device can sit in your lap and it's almost like infinite possibilities for how you can manipulate the interface, right? So in general, like those are just a lot more user-friendly for those particular kinds of different degrees of ability, right? And so I think that's another reason why those might be so popular. I didn't actually put a slide for it here, but PC, a lot of my participants play PC, which is funny because PC is like, the hardcore elite status of gamers, right? So to have PC and mobile phones at the top too, I think it's really funny. And I think with PC, a lot of it is the MMO players, it's the amazing, the indie scene, right, has opened up space, as all for so many more kinds of games and storytelling that just appeal to a wider range of people, right? I love that, and a lot of them talked about indie games that mean a lot to them, that they spend a lot of time playing, right? So I think that's definitely like a big explaining part of that factor, right? All right, so some conclusions. So overall, gender matters. It absolutely matters, but not in the way that researchers often make it out to, right? It's not like, oh, boys like this and girls like this, and that's just the way it is, right? Like, well, I mean, it is that way maybe because we've made it that way, right? Because how we're socializing people culturally and socially. And we see this when we look at things like access, right? Whether or not you have it, and how that can be tied to things like gender and the makeup of your family, and your parents' perspectives on gender roles and those sorts of things. And also the quality of those experiences, right? So again, if I may not play multiplayer games, or I may not use in-game chat features, and I'm missing out on that whole world because of fears that I have, right, based on my gender identity. And that's something that I personally, have identified with, right? Didn't wear a headset for about 15 years after a bad experience when I was much younger, right? Finally got back on the horse like a year ago. It took me that long. And it takes a special emotional energy, right? I have to like psych myself up to do it. Anyway. Device and genre, right? I mean, this data suggests that potentially that's all very much lifestyle driven, and in some of those cases, based on gender-based constraints, right? So, not to write those things off, right? And again, I say, I don't like to solicit people for studies by hailing them as gamers. I use the term players because a lot of people discount themselves from that community based on perceptions about the devices or the genres they play, and I don't think that should be right? I'm kind of the mind that games are for everybody and phone games count and you're legit, right? If you are super into Candy Crush, then awesome, you're a gamer in my book. So anyway, culture is driving a lot of those kinds of choices as well as just kind of preference for play style. And this lack of interest narrative, I don't buy it, right? I think it's just patently false. And I think that, again, we have to look at gendered constraints on things like leisure and, again, parental gatekeeping and broader socialization trends to really understand the full picture, right, of how girls and adult women are experiencing games, right, and what we might, how that might influence design choices and the way that games are marketed. And like I said, hopefully based on this, I talked to 3,000 awesome adult women who play games, many who were parents, a lot who talked about someday being parents. I think we'll see a lot of this kind of continue in a positive, kind of more inclusive trajectory. All right. That's all I have to say, but I'm happy to take anybody's questions about anything related to this, questions about what I studied or anything in general. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk, that was really cool.
Thank you.
When you were doing these interviews, were you able to get any clear answers about particular game design solutions or things that worked well for people who do have kind of broken up leisure time?
Yeah. Dude, the ability to pause games. And this is one that me as an able-bodied person without a pairing, I still hate it. Because I have a dog, and sometimes he needs to go outside. I guess it's the closest thing, right? There was I like Destiny 2 still, don't hate me. But I remember when that game first came out, there was a really great piece written it wasn't Kotaku, but it was like one of those, right? And it was like, Destiny 2 is impossible to play if you're a parent. And I loved it because it was like all about how like, yeah, you're with your squad, and it is one of these games where like, you know, if you're, some of these raids might take 2.5 hours, right? And it's a lot of coordination, and you're on a headset, and it's always like it's live, right? You're interacting with other people, so you can't pause the game. And so what do? And so a lot of my participants, you know, with disabilities or things like that, where they would need to step away, like, you know, to use a restroom or whatever it might be, that basic feature, you know, is now lacking from so many games. And so that was probably the one that I heard the most often, like something as simple as that. I will say things like settings for color blindness and stuff like that are also, those are coming a long way now. Like we finally have started doing that a lot. So things like that are also good. But yeah, I mean, just being able to stop playing, like, right, to pause it, I would say was the most common thing I heard. Yeah, it's a great question. Mm-hmm.
Is there a place we can access your research or read what you...
Yeah, sure, if you want. Yeah, no, so the whole dissertation is currently online. I can send you a link after if you'd like, or I'll tweet it out too. Yeah, no, so it's there, you can read it. There's probably some typos in it. Every once in a while I look at it and I'm like, okay, that's embarrassing. Yeah, I'm actually working on turning this into a book, fingers crossed, so that hopefully you can get out into wider networks, because I think it's important and it resonates with a lot of people. But yeah, I'll send you a link to the disc at the very least. Thank you. Yeah.
Do you also have any results on like aesthetics and what kind of attracts them, like the art style or music or any things like that?
Yeah, I didn't write about it kind of expressly in there, but in the interviews and in the surveys, thinking back to like why do you play certain games, like a lot of them would talk about like narrative, like the importance of narrative, or like just the immersive world. For some of them it was music, for some of them it was art. So I don't have like figures, I didn't break it down, like number crunch it to get like a particular table, but it's probably something I can do at some point.
Yeah, because I mean personally, I feel like sometimes just looking at the aesthetics, I just won't play the game. I have no idea how the mechanics are.
Yeah.
I just like look at it and I'm like, this is not appealing to me.
I'm the same way. Aesthetics like really matter to me. Yeah, if it's not pretty, I kind of don't want it. Is that weird? Yeah. I don't know. John, did you have a question? Yeah.
Do you think there's, from a business standpoint, do you think there's a marketing space for a company to come out with basically what Sears did in the 90s with the softer side of Sears campaign, like specifically target women? Because back in the 90s, Sears figured out that women had all the purchasing power.
Yeah.
And clearly from just your call for surveys, there is a thirst of an entire market who is like, no, we have opinions, we want to share our opinions, we want more of this.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if there is some marketing space where a company can come out and say, we're going to do exactly what Sears did in the 90s and move on this market segment.
Yeah. So I have like such mixed feelings about this. I mean, so first of all, we kind of tried it in the 90s in a way, right? There was like the girls' games movement, if people are familiar with that. So like there was like a concentrated effort to design games that were targeted at a young girl demographic, because no one had done it before. So like all the Barbie games that were like super popular, like anybody have the Barbie fashion, what was it called? Barbie fashion designer or whatever, where you like printed off skirts or something and you could put them on your, I mean, okay, it was actually like dope. Like I wasn't really into Barbies, but that game was amazing, and it sold millions of units. It was insane. So there were a lot of like Barbie games and a lot of like other, actually some kind of thoughtful like games targeted towards girls, but it didn't create quite the boom that I think the industry was hoping for. And so that perpetuated this like lack of interest narrative. The industry said like, oh, well that was that, we tried, and girls just don't want it, right? And then it was like put to rest. Nowadays, like in terms of like, you know, do I think we should, is it so much just how we market games that exist, or are you saying like design games? You're saying more about marketing, I think.
Yeah, I'm saying more of like, is there a way to try to capture this marketing segment? Because it's clearly a large group of people who want to do it, but it's like, you can't just make a Barbie game or a My Little Pony game and expect it to just be like, oh, it's automatically going to be successful. It's like, I feel like Destiny 2 never marketed itself as an inclusive thing. Yeah. A lot of the shooting games, or most of the games that you said, they're just more like boy games or men games. There's none of that inclusivity thing that's going in right now. Like Apex Legends is doing right now with their kind of roster of characters. Overwatch is starting to do that a lot more with their roster of characters. are there more ways to do it from a more marketing standpoint, to do like, more inclusive marketing material, character designs, things like that might resonate better?
Right. I think it's a fair question. I think for one, like representation of women and other kinds of gender identities in your advertising is a big start. There's been a lot of research that does like content analysis, so literally like counting ads from old, from gaming magazines or now like in online spaces, and it's just, they're not featuring women, right? And so it's one of those things, like if I see myself represented in those spaces, like I might respond to it more positively. I don't know, again, I have mixed feelings about like any kind of like targeted marketing approach. I think, but I feel you. Like at the same time, like we want these people to know this is here, right? And that it's like a good space for them. So I don't know, I don't have like an exact business strategy in mind, and for me, it's more about like designing games that themselves like are inclusive, right, and the communities around them. I don't think it's like I'm going to set out to make a game that is like quote unquote for women or anything like that, but it's like I'm going to make a game where like people feel welcome, and I think that starts with things like representation. Like Overwatch is maybe more. It's definitely like one of the heavier female, not dominated, but female popularity, right? Kinds of games out there, period. And I think a lot of that has to do with just diverse cast and kind of a twist on the traditional FPS, right? I never played FPS because I thought I was garbage at them, and then Overwatch became kind of the gateway, and from there it was Destiny and a bunch of other stuff, right? So I think it's like, I don't know, it's more about like the game design and just making that stuff accessible and fun and inclusive from that kind of standpoint. Yeah.
I would say that's all great. The problem you've got is you've got pushback from the white male community for the large part of it.
Yeah.
So just the cover art for Battlefield 5 comes out. Oh my God, women and people with disabled. It's like, no.
Yeah.
They throw this stuff back at you all the time.
Yeah.
And they're very vocal. They're very strongly worded. They're intimidatingly so.
Yeah.
It's like, and what? The only white guy in Apex Legends happens to be called Toxic. Oh my God. This is like going against the white guys. It's like,
Right.
Absolutely. Let's just make it diverse, make it open, and make it inclusive. Hopefully those voices will just go down over time when they realise that no, we're not trying to get rid of them.
Yeah.
We're just we all play games. It's nice to see that I can play as a woman in a game for once.
Right.
That's now not becoming abnormal, which is great. I can pick up a lot of games these days, and I can be a woman, which is oh my God, this is amazing. I grew up with Wolfenstein. I loved it. BJ Blazkowicz has got a special place in my heart. I love being able to play as a female character. So just the option of actually having choice on who you are, your ethnicity, your gender, whatever, is that's fantastic. I just hope we can just keep ignoring the people who think that diversity is good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it too is it's like almost quality control, right? Like when people are assholes in your space, actually pursuing those individuals and banning them. I know there's issues about banning and how effective those are, but sometimes nothing at all happens. Like esports, things happen, right? Like trash talking the few female players we have, and there's no repercussions. You're still on the roster after you were a toxic jerk face. That shouldn't exist, right? A culture of support in general, I think we need. Yeah.
I'm actually kind of curious about, and you might not have looked at this specifically, but the breakdown of women who play games, multiplayer games, where there is a in-game voice communication option versus that are only text or something like that.
Yeah.
To see if that has any impact on.
Yeah, so if you didn't have to use, I feel like a few of them talked about it. I remember it was a big deal. So I was really into Heroes of the Storm. I still like it, and I know again R.I.P. But so sad. But I remember it was a really huge deal because they used to. It wasn't the auto chat, or it was a thing now where it forces you more into the chat, even a text chat kind of thing. Whereas before, you didn't have to do that. And so, or now, no, what it was is they didn't have voice chat. It wasn't a feature, and they added it. That's what it was. And it was a huge issue, especially actually for a lot of trans individuals. I'm forgetting her name, but there's a streamer, Steph. Oh gosh, anybody know what I'm talking about? Steph. I'm forgetting her last name right now. But she goes by Ferociously Steph, is her handle, and she's great. And was a super competitive Heroes of the Storm player, and was great, and was really really vocal when this came out because she says if I have like a lower, more masculine sounding voice, I'm outing myself in that space, right? So like if somebody sees my handle, you know, and it's like Steph, right, a traditionally female name, right, a feminine name, and they hear what sounds like a more masculine voice, it can send people like into a tizzy, right, in these spaces. And so like she wrote a lot of stuff, actually trying to lobby for them to not add that feature to the game, and then they ended up doing it anyway. So some of my participants would talk about, you know, just not using headsets, right, like at all. I remember one young woman talking about her boyfriend, like when they play together, they both wear headsets so she can hear, but she makes him do all the talking, right? So like he's the only one who actually like speaks, even though she's there as well. And to me, like it's sad, and I get it. And I'm not saying like I wouldn't do the same thing if I had that option, right? And you know, so that's the frustration of it. So yeah, I did get the impression that for some of them, that was like it mattered, right? And I think a lot of them would prefer to just be able to like text, right, or the ping system. And I think Apex Legends just is like, that's kind of one of the attractive features. I haven't played it yet, but is that you can do it all without needing voice, right? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, actually, from the tangential thing as well is, I'm actually anticipating an issue with virtual and augmented reality with women in games, for example, because actually one of the things I did for some research was what ended up happening is I had mostly male participants, but a female participant for VR study. And there were two issues that I did not anticipate for, which was one, she had her hair in a bun, so just putting that on your head was difficult. And two, she wore makeup, so it was something that you definitely needed to clean after the test.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, I think it says a lot, and we can finish with this because I think we're short on time here, but the idea of like even how we design technology, or the assumptions that go into those things,
Right.
you know, are made based off of kind of the default male archetype, right? Or even like white people, right? Like all that stuff. We are always kind of keeping the, you know, the mainstream in mind and the default when we do those things. So yeah, it was a point well taken, definitely. Cool. All right. Well, awesome. I'm glad to keep answering people's questions afterwards. Definitely seek me out, but I don't want to cut into other people's time. So thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you.